So good morning, everyone. I'm Keriann Kozub with Renaissance Executive Forums. I see a lot of familiar faces today. Thank you all for participating in our expert insight. Today, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Andy Maurer. Andy is a keynote speaker and an emotional wellness coach for high performance leaders, CEOs, founders, influencers, entrepreneurs, helping them pursue what he calls emotional wholeness, healing their relationship with themselves, others, and their work. Andy is a licensed therapist specializing in leadership, trauma, and emotional health, holding both a Master's of Divinity in Professional Counseling and a Master's in Marital Family Therapy. So after many years of working with leaders, Andy has come to believe that any leader can change the world, but only whole and emotionally healthy leaders are empowered to change it for the better, something that we also believe here in Executive Forums. So today we are talking about the new science of toxic stress and how it's impacting your leadership. Given everything that we have been through this year, I can't think of a better topic to close out 2020 with our expert insights and prepare ourselves for what lies ahead in 2021. Welcome, Andy, and take it away.
Hi, thank you, Keriann. Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking some time away before the holidays. I'm happy everybody's here. I think the first thing to really bring up is, to help us define what is toxic stress. I want every single person on this call today to feel some level of stress in their life, because through stress, we grow. Through stress, we actually learn, we develop. Memory and cognition, creativity, relationships are better when we influence them with a little bit of stress in our life. Now, naturally with stress, what we see, and if anybody has comments on this or you have questions, please include them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them as I go along. But with stress, what we naturally see is that stress happens and it goes up and then it comes back down. So naturally, I should feel a little bit of stress on this call, and that should increase my level of cognition, my level of performance. It's when stress becomes too high or it becomes prolonged, that's when we call it toxic stress. So stress is good. We have a spike in stress, it comes down and it goes back down to baseline. When toxic stress happens, stress goes up, it stays elevated, stays elevated, stays elevated, and it doesn't quite come down to baseline. So how I define toxic stress, and we'll jump right into this, is toxic stress is prolonged and elevated levels of stress in the absence of deep connection. So let's break that down for 2020, especially. Prolonged, absolutely. Elevated, yes. In the absence of deep connection, absolutely. Okay. We have high levels of stress and we have low levels of connection. And we'll talk about both of those. But our brain, the way the brain works, our brain doesn't really do well with unknowns. So if you know that you have a certain amount of time left to live, let's say you have cancer, but you know that there's a date to it. Let's say you have 3 months or you have 4 months, at least you have some time frame in your mind. That's going to be easier to grapple with than someone saying you have cancer. We're not quite sure how long. It could be 15 years. It could be 5 months. To have such a broad span of time, our brain doesn't do well with that. We know that with COVID, what we've seen over and over again is we think it's going to be short, and then it's longer, and then it's longer, and then it's longer, and we're not quite sure when it's going to end. The brain doesn't adjust well to that type of stress at all. So with toxic stress, what we see toxic stress pop in the most is typically early on in childhood. Okay, and we see toxic stress happen through what we call adverse childhood experiences. And that could be a divorce in a family, it could be substance abuse in a family, it could be any types of abuse, but it could be more subtle forms of adverse childhood experiences or trauma, such as a difficult labor and delivery for a mother or a child. It could be genetic, that there was abuse done to the mother while the child was in the womb. That can be traumatic. It could be a car accident. It could be being hired for a very stressful role. It could be being fired from. It could be a role. It could be building and starting a company. There are lots of things that can be traumatized, categorized as traumatic or stressful. Okay, so when you think of toxic stress, don't just think high levels of intense things that have happened. Think of them as prolonged. So there are two different kinds of stress. You either have stress that hits your system, that rattles your system, okay? and something traumatic happens, it's a one-time event, or you have kind of a way of being or an environment that you're in that's like a sandpaper that constantly is wearing, a sandpaper that's constantly wearing away. And what that does is that can also produce prolonged elevated levels of stress. Okay. So what we know, toxic stress is prevalent. There are really 10 symptoms that I've identified as I've researched and looked at toxic stress. And what I'd ask you to do is I'd ask you to just check in with yourself on these 10 symptoms, maybe put out a finger for each symptom. Don't put it up on the screen. We don't want to see how stressed everybody is. But I'm going to run through these because I think they're helpful. Maybe they'll help you identify if toxic stress is a part of your life. So the first thing is if we have toxic stress, we find that it's actually very difficult to slow down and be present. And part of the reason for that, especially with leaders that I work with, they're constantly running, moving, okay? And when they come into my office and I ask them, what do you need from me? They say, I need tools to figure out how to keep moving or to get from point A to point B, essentially. And I have to break the news to them that it's your tools, it's your constant running, it's your pursuit of things that's actually getting in the way of what's going on the inside. So I asked them, why don't we pause for 60 seconds? And I want you to maintain eye contact with me. And I want you to just monitor and notice your breath. And when they do that, I asked them, when's the last time you did that? And they said, I haven't slowed down like that for years. I'm constantly moving. So one thing we know about toxic stress is our system is amped and we consistently keep moving. So the second thing that comes up is we often have frequent fluctuations in mood. Okay, now it's very normal for leaders and entrepreneurs to experience highs and lows. That's a natural part of leadership. That's a natural part of business. But when these highs and lows become too intense, too high and too low, or they become too rapid, that is a sign that toxic stress has kind of hit our system and is living out in a day-to-day process. Okay, so the third thing is that we have a very difficult time stopping patterns and behaviors that are consistent in our life. And I used to say here, we have a hard time stopping addictions, but whenever you say addictions, someone says they don't have an addiction, and that's actually the number one sign they have an addiction, is the denial that they have an addiction. So what I defined it as is, what patterns and behaviors do you find yourself continuing to do that you can't stop? And what we know about addictions is addictions are an attempt to reach for something on the outside in order to calm something on the inside. So when there's stress and there's anxiety and there's insecurity and there's depression or despair, what we do is we reach out for work. We reach out for performance. We reach out for relationships. We reach out for a bottle of wine at night. We drink a full bottle of wine before we go to bed, and then we pound caffeine throughout the day. We're constantly kind of reaching for our world to calm what's going on the inside, and we can't stop that pattern because we don't know how to deal with what's on the inside. So that was number 3. Number 4 is a sense of feeling shame or a sense of imposter syndrome. And all this means is that what I show you and what's actually going on the inside are drastically different. Okay, and we'll talk about burnout here in a second, but when we experience shame, it means that I'm scared for you to see what's on the inside, and what I put on the outside is something very different than what's going on the inside, because I'm afraid of, if you see that I'm lonely, if you see that I'm anxious, if you see that I'm insecure, maybe you won't fund my company, maybe you won't believe in me as a leader. So we have this shame, but we also have this imposter syndrome that we have to be on, we have to perform, even though we don't feel like we can on the inside. And that is a symptom of toxic stress. The 5th thing is that we really struggle to find hobbies, and we've really struggled to play in our life. Now, if you've ever done research around play and hobbies, it's actually fascinating because play enhances the prefrontal cortex, the creative part of the brain, the logical part of the brain. It brings a sense of calm and relaxation in the body. But for most leaders have hobbies and play, but a lot of them will say, I don't play, my play is my work. That is what I do. I don't slow down, I don't play. And here's the best hobby that I've defined for people. Do something that is a complete waste of time and has nothing to do with your work. That is a fantastic hobby, okay? So if it's golf, but you do golf and you do it for networking, for business, maybe a hobby, But I think the best hobbies are those things that you do that are a complete waste of time and don't relate to your work at all. And what that does is it kind of resets our nervous system. But we have a struggle with that when toxic stress is prevalent. Okay, the sixth thing is we do have a difficult time trusting others. Okay, so when toxic stress has hit our system, we're in fight, flight, or freeze, and we have a very difficult time reaching out and trusting others. I used to do this exercise with a lot of leaders. I still do this. In working with a group of leaders, one of the exercises that I would do is I would have them hold out their hands like this for 30 seconds. I'd have them sit across from each other. One individual would hold their hands out for 30 seconds, and then we would switch. And I'd ask them, notice what happens in your body. Notice what comes up in your mind. Notice what emotions and thoughts kind of are evoked in that process of reaching out your hands. And more likely than not, that exercise evokes a lot of emotion in people. It's actually very difficult for them to reach out, because if you think about children, and really all of us have a child inside of us. In this adult body, we have this child inside of us. But when you think about children, what does this mean when they reach out? Okay, that typically means that they want up, or they want help, or they need something. And most of us have learned really early on, I don't reach out for help. I don't reach out for what I need. I don't ask for help because either the people who I asked for help, told me that I'm a wuss, or that I'm not strong enough, or that I need to be, more put together, or they used my vulnerability and they actually used that to take advantage of me in a lot of ways. So we learn as leaders, what's the best position for me as a leader to not be vulnerable and not need people? Oh, it's the CEO. Okay. So I don't have to really show up for anybody. I don't have to have anybody in my life. I can show up for everyone else around me in my world. So difficult reaching out and asking for help. The seventh thing is difficulty with empathy and listening objectively. Okay. Now, the reason why empathy becomes really difficult when we experience toxic stress, the number one symptom of toxic stress is avoidance of our stress. Okay. It's avoidance of our body. It's avoidance of what's actually going on. And we like to stay busy so that we don't have to slow down and feel. And if we can't feel the hard things going on inside of us, if Keriann comes to me and she starts to share some hard things in her life, that will evoke that inside of me. So what I naturally do is I kind of push Keriann away. That's too heavy, that's too much. And I have to start fixing her. I have to start managing her, because that's the only way I know how to deal with my own stuff, is to fix it, to manage it, to get it right. I don't know how to empathize with my pain. I don't know how to empathize with my stress, and therefore I can't empathize with Keriann's stress. So if you struggle with empathy as a leader, oftentimes it's because we lack empathy for ourselves. And that comes out of a system that's been rattled by toxic stress. Okay, number 8, difficulty forming and maintaining deep relationships. Okay, and part of the reason for this, if I use my drink here as an example, there's what leaders show to the people that they lead. And what they show is usually things that are naturally put together, confident, secure, charismatic, energetic. And those are the things that they show. But then there's typically a whole world behind that leader on the inside about insecurity, hidden behaviors and addictions, broken relationships, that they struggle with confidence, all of these different things. But when someone engages with them, they engage with this part of them that's very put together. So that part gets loved, that part gets to be known, that part gets to be seen and heard, but this part does not. So this is why a lot of leaders say, I feel like I know so many people come to me, I'm an influencer, I have a lot of people who look up to me, but I still feel lonely. How's that possible? Well, because there's only one part of you that's getting known. There's a whole nother part of you as a leader that's not getting known. And that's the part that's actually saying, I feel lonely. So it's difficult to form deep relationships, because as soon as someone gets close to me, I'm typically afraid of 2 things are going to happen. I'm either afraid they're going to peel back the curtain and they're going to see, oh, wow, this person has a lot of stuff inside. Whoa, I didn't know that was going on. I didn't know that was going on. And they're going to be like, whoa, I don't trust this person. And they're going to run away. that's going to happen. Or the other thing's going to happen is they're going to peel back the curtain and they're going to go, oh, there's not much here. This person's kind of a fake, they're a facade, they're putting on confidence, but they're really insecure. They're not really that smart, they're just a pretty face. There's that fear of either I'm going to be too much, there's too much going on inside, or people are going to peel back the curtain and they're going to see that I'm a nobody, I'm nothing, I don't have anything to offer. And that shame, that fear drives us from getting close to people, drives us away from getting close to people. And once again, when toxic stress is in our system is rattled in these ways. Okay, number 9, we avoid bodily needs. Okay, so I'm going to use an example here that probably everyone relates to. You know how sometimes you need to use the bathroom, but you're in a meeting or you're in a conference room or you're in a setting where you're like, oh man, I really need to use the bathroom, but I think I'll just hold it because I'm in this important meeting. So you hold it, 10 seconds go by, 5 minutes go by, and then you realize, oh my goodness, now I really need to go to the bathroom, because you put it inside and now it's kind of exploding and you run to the bathroom, partly because your body needed something there. You neglected it, you avoided it, and it's going to come back to hit you 10 times harder. Now, what's weird is we do this all the time. We're thirsty, so what do? Oh, I'm not going to drink water right now. I'm going to wait. I need to use the restroom. Oh, I'll wait. I'm really tired. Oh, I'll drink more caffeine. Okay. I'm really lonely. Oh, I'll just dig into my work more. Our body feels something and then we almost do the opposite of what it needs. And that is a sign of toxic stress. And lastly, we find ourselves in this pattern of going hard, burning out, feeling depressed, and then kicking ourselves in the butt. So what I mean by this is, here we are as leaders, we push, then we get burned out, then we feel depressed, and then we feel shame about being depressed, and we're like, we have too much we have to do, we have to hold it together, and then we kick ourselves in the butt, and then we come back and we hold it together, and then we go through that process again, that process of burnout. So these are 10 symptoms of toxic stress that happen, and it really does impact your performance. So these are the signs and symptoms that toxic stress might be living in your body, in your mind, but it really impacts our relationships and it impacts our performance, okay? If you've ever heard of the CEO Genome Project, that study looked at 17,000 C-suite executives. It's one of the largest studies ever done on CEOs and C-suite executives. And they found 4 qualities that make up a highly successful CEO, okay? And I'm not going to go into detail on them now. I can send them to Keriann. I'd love to distribute that. But each one of those 4, as I researched it, I realized, oh, toxic stress impacts that and takes that away. Oh, toxic stress minimizes that. Oh, toxic stress inhibits that. Oh, toxic stress gets in the way of that one. All 4 prized qualities of C-suite executives were inhibited by toxic stress and trauma in our system. Okay, so once again, every single person on this call has something in their past that was stressful, that went up, that just kind of stayed up. Okay, it could be as subtle as bullying, it could be as subtle as, something going on in a family that was just a sandpaper that was just grinding, that maybe my parents got divorced and then maybe I took on the role of father, or I took on the role of mother way too young as a kid. There's these different things that happen that create stress that our system is not built for. And what that does is it shuts off the logical part of our brain, okay? So your brain is built in these different regions. The logical and rational part of our brain shut off when we experience stress, and it sends signals down to the emotional part of our brain, which deals with fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, so let me give a little bit of science here, and then we're going to move into the topic of burnout, and then we'll talk about where do we go from here. Okay, I don't want to just define toxic stress and have everybody realize, oh my gosh, I have a lot of stress, and he's identifying it, and now I don't know what to do with it. But really helpful for you to understand how this impacts you on a day-to-day. So if this is your brain, okay, let's say this is my brain, hopefully my brain's a little larger than that, but our brain develops from bottom to top, and then it develops from right to left, okay? If you think about your brain, Think of it as glasses. Different regions see the world through different lenses. So at the base of the brain, our brainstem develops first, and that deals with fight, flight, or freeze, and it deals with things that we don't even think about: digestion, heart rate, respiratory rate. You don't even think about these things. They go automatically on in your system, okay? That develops first. Next is your limbic system, and this sees the world through relationships and emotion. And lastly, what's developed is the prefrontal cortex. It's the front of your brain here, and it wraps over the top. That is logical, planning, reasoning part of our brain, okay? Now, inside the amygdala, there's a little region here. Inside the limbic system, there's a little region here called the amygdala, okay? And the amygdala is the fire alarm system of the brain. So if the fire alarm went off in this building, I would get out of here instantaneously. It would send signals to my body saying, escape, get out, run. Now, when the amygdala goes off, do you think it sends signals up to my logical brain, or does it send signals down to my emotional brain? Give me a thumbs up for logical and a thumbs down for emotional. Where do you think the energy goes? Down, right? Because the logical brain is more advanced, it's slower. And when we experience threat and stress, we need to respond quickly. That's why we go all the way down to the very primitive part of our brain around fight, flight, or freeze. Now, when our amygdala has been tapped and hit so many times, threat, threat, stress, 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 that fire alarm system becomes really, in some ways, broken. Every interaction, every sensation, every experience is a threat, okay? So we can't help but be in fight, flight, or freeze, and therefore we're not in our logical brain, we're down in our emotional brain. So most people think, I'm a very logical person, I'm very rational, and then when we get into it, we realize they think they're logical, but they're actually responding very emotional. They're not being emotional, but their emotional brain around fight, flight, or freeze is driving the way they do business, the way they do relationships, the way they do their marriage, the way they interact with their kids. It's not logical, creative. Let me take a pause and think about what I'm doing right now. It's very reactive, and it comes out of that fight, flight, or freeze brain, okay? So a couple things here. 10 symptoms of toxic stress. When we experience stress at high levels, it sends signals to our amygdala, which sends signals down to our base of our brain, going into fight, flight, or freeze, okay? So very, very difficult for you as leaders, men and women, to be logical, rational, and intelligent and creative when you have toxic stress in your body. Okay, last thing on this, I want to talk about burnout very briefly, because I think as we go into the holidays, I'm noticing it even for myself. I'm literally counting down the days till Christmas break, because I feel a little bit burned out. I've been going really hard over the last 4 months. I'm feeling that stress kind of built. I really need a reset for my system, okay? So I want to take the shame out of it, that even I myself am feeling this prolonged and elevated kind of stress in my life. Burnout happens 4 different ways, okay? Burnout happens 4 different ways. Burnout happens when natural stress becomes toxic stress. Okay, that's when burnout happens. Natural stress that goes up and comes down becomes toxic stress that becomes prolonged and elevated, and we don't have anyone to talk about it with. Okay, that's one reason. The second reason is those highs and those lows that we talked about, they either get really close together or they get really elevated. Okay, so natural to have some highs and lows throughout your week, but if you have highs and lows like this 10 times a day, your emotional system and your physical system cannot tolerate that level of cortisol and adrenaline being released in your body, okay? Your adrenal glands, which produce cortisol, and the part of your brain that produces cortisol around stress, will get tapped out, it will get depleted, and that's when we go into adrenal fatigue and burnout. If it's too fast, or if they're too extreme, okay, that will cause a sense of burnout. The third thing is when who you are and what you have to be who you are and who you have to be have a large distance between them. Here's what I mean by that. If you know your personality is introverted, if you know that there are certain core qualities of you as an individual and you're in a role that's pushing you out of that personality, out of those natural tendencies, the further apart you get there from who I naturally am to who I have to be, that's going to increase burnout because there's incongruence there. Okay. Doesn't mean that you can't stretch and grow as a leader and try different things in different categories. That's a natural part of leadership. But you don't want those to be so far apart because that's going to be a misalignment in who you are, and that's going to tap your system. Okay. And the last thing around burnout is what you show and what's actually on the inside also is far apart. Okay, so if I show on this call that I'm an emotional wellness coach and I have everything put together and I have all the right answers and I'm happy and I don't have stress and look at me, I figured it out. If I have to be that coach in that image and on the inside I feel depressed and lonely and scared, but I can't show that, the further apart that those two get, higher chance of burnout in my life. Okay, so 4 ways that burnout kind of happens. Some of it's toxic stress, but a lot of it is really difficulty with who I am and what I have to be. And everything that I know about leadership and working with leaders, the higher up you go, the more successful you become, the more money you have. It actually suffocates you more in a lot of ways. Okay, you have less people who just want to know you as Andy. And you have a lot more people who either want something from you or need something from you. Very difficult to know who can I trust with this confidential information. Where do I go to have someone that I can share about my fears and my struggles and my insecurities? That becomes harder the higher up you go, okay, and the more image that you possess. So that's a lot of the education, a lot of the science. I want to talk a little bit about where do we go from here, give you some tools and tips and strategies. And then I want to open it up for some Q&A because I want to hear from you on how this connects with you and how I can best help you and support you. So the first thing is I want you to think about your space, okay? The psychology of space, the psychology of the world around you. We take in information through our 5 senses, okay? So sight, taste, smell, touch, and hear. Those 5 senses were continually taking in information from our external world, and it's shaping and changing our internal state, our internal emotional balance. So one thing I want you to think about is my environment, from what I see, either fostering emotional wholeness or disconnection and stress? Okay, and it could be something as simple as this: the lighting ratios in my office. If I feel high levels of stress, now I have in my office, I can kind of turn my light down or I can turn it up. If I'm feeling high levels of stress, do I want my light blaring and glaring in my eyes? No, because that's going to increase my nervous system. It's going to increase my energy up. I'm going to want to bring that down. Now, if I have an important business meeting I have to go into and I feel lethargic and I feel down, I'm going to want to amp that light up. I'm going to want to increase the level of energy that's coming through my eyes. Okay. And around what we hear, okay, if I need my body to calm down, if I feel my heart rate's elevated and I feel anxious and I feel amped up, I probably shouldn't listen to music or be around a lot of conversations or listen to a lot of podcasts that are high energy podcasts, okay, or high energy noises. I'm going to want to go into a room and I'm going to want to find quiet. So all this is here's your system, either high or low, and you want to be right here, what we call the window of tolerance. It's right in the middle as much as possible. And you want to use your environment to adjust that. Now, what a lot of people do is when they feel amped up, when they feel anxious, they amp themselves up even more. They drink more caffeine. They don't sleep. They stay even more busy. So when they're amped up, they even go higher. And when they're down and depressed and discouraged, they listen to quiet music and then they drink and then they go into a dark room. It's like, instead of balancing that out, we kind of continue that extreme. So with your five senses, I want you to think about, ask the question, am I high energy or am I low energy? Am I anxious or am I more feeling discouraged and depressed? Based on where you're at in your energy level, I want you to think about your five senses and how you take in information and adjust that. So decrease the light. Okay, eat a food that's not as acidic or that is not as, if you need something sour or spicy, that might increase your nervous system. If you need to come down, you might want to eat something that's a little bit more calm and soothing and relaxing. When you think about your body, very much think about the clothes that you wear, okay? I want you to think about, if I'm going into a business meeting and I feel anxious, I need clothing that's going to create comfort in my body, okay? And if I'm going in and I'm feeling discouraged and I'm naturally kind of more prone to feeling low, I need clothing that's going to adjust my posture, maybe a suit that's going to create more structure and shape to my posture, my body posture. Okay, so really important. Think about your space. Literally think about the office that you're in. My office has a lot of emotional and mental cues to it when I work with people. So this picture right here, this is something I see. Okay, this to me is the epitome of high performance. Okay, he's muscular, it's perfected, it's like a gymnast, it's a level 10, perfect, and yet high level of vulnerability. Okay, because he doesn't have clothes on, right? He's naked. It's this exposure with perfectionism. Okay, and that to me is vulnerability. This light over here, it says play. That's very important for my nervous system. When I feel like I have to perform too much, I look at that light. That's a cue to me. That's an emotional cue to remind me, relax, take a breath, be curious, have fun. Okay, and I have a lot of other stuff in my office that's for me to stay emotionally present and grounded. I have, I have a curtain on my window so that people can't look in. So if I want people to look in, I open it up. It's just depending upon my mood state, my energy. So change your space to adjust your level of stress to what you need it to be. The second thing is I want you to change your breath to support you emotionally. When we're under stress, okay, we curl up like this and we cross our legs and we bend over. When we're stressed, we have very shallow breath and we breathe from our lungs. We breathe from our shoulders, okay? So let me take my jacket off just so I can show you a little bit better here. I want to visualize this. When we think about breath and we feel stressed, I'm going to typically be breathing. My chest is going to come up to my face. Okay, notice my shoulders raise and they go up about that much. I'm using my back muscles and I'm using my chest to pull air into my body. Instead of diaphragmatic breathing, which if I'm here, I put a hand on my belly. My hand should go out and in on my belly if I'm doing diaphragmatic breathing. And an easy way to do that is to actually breathe through your nose. Diaphragmatic breathing is going to use better muscles. When we're stressed, we use our shoulders. And when we have more mindfulness, we have more balance, we use our diaphragm. It goes in and out, okay? The other thing that you can do is nasal breathing. There's a fantastic book by a guy named James Nestor. It's called Breathe, The New Science of a Lost Art. Fantastic book. It's the science of how naturally as people, we've become mouth breathers, which means, we sleep at night like this, and we're constantly breathing through our mouth and not through our nose. But when we breathe through our nose is shaped in a way that filters the air, cools and heats the air, pressurizes the air. Okay, very important. You have mucus consistently running down the back of your throat through your nose. So it takes in all the dirty air, it filters it, and it runs it down through your stomach, and it goes through the acidity and it kills it, okay? When we breathe through our mouth, that's not the case. When we breathe through our nose, we naturally breathe slower, we're naturally calmer, and it decreases our nervous system. Okay, so simply keeping your mouth closed throughout the day and practicing breathing through your nose is going to help adjust your nervous system, where toxic stress is going to do this to your system. Okay, you got to think about, how am I going to create some balance and stability in my nervous system that's been all riled up and shaken up? Okay, nasal breathing and diaphragmatic breathing are extremely important. Okay, so we talked about your physical space. We talked about changes in your breathing. Now I want to talk about changes in your body. Okay. Here's the posture that I want you to take when you feel overwhelmed or stressed. I want you to put both your feet flat on the ground. I want you to sit on something firm, and I want you to lean back against the chair. I want you to feel your spine get straight like steel. I want you to visualize my spine getting straight like steel and my heart being warm and open. Okay, what that does, you're putting your body in a position that's going to support you emotionally. And research shows that when we imagine our spine as steel, it increases confidence. And when we imagine our heart being warm and soft, it increases openness and warmth and curiosity. You don't want to be cold and put off. You don't want to be let people know that you don't like them or that you're annoyed by them. So remembering to keep that front part warm and open is going to be openness, curiosity, warmth, but I still have my sense of confidence. Feet flat on the ground is going to increase your sense of stability and groundedness. Most people cross their legs, and the largest vein in your body is your femoral artery, which runs through underneath your thigh. So when you cross your legs, you're literally constricting the blood flow of the largest vein in your body that's taking oxygen through your body. So feet flat on the ground, spine straight, taking a deep breath. And the reason why this works is because we have the longest nerve in our body is called the vagus nerve. You can look it up. It's a polyvagal theory. The longest vein in our body runs from the base of our brain all the way through all of our vital organs, and it ends down near our butt, okay, or down by our hip. 90%, about 90% of that nerve sends signals from our body to our brain. Now, most nerves in our brain send signals from our brain to our body to respond. What's significant about the vagus nerve is when I take a deep breath, when I adjust my spine, when I sit up straight, I'm cueing that nerve, sending signals up to my brain to say, be balanced, be calm, be confident, be curious. If I'm bent over like this in a meeting, my vagus nerve is also sending signals up to my brain, and it's telling me, oh, Andy's body is in a state of stress, anxiety, and closed. So he's not going to be curious. He's not going to be open. He's probably going to be in fight, flight, or freeze. My body tells my brain how it should respond. So I'm not pulling like a change your body and it's going to make you happy kind of thing. I'm just letting you know this can be a helpful technique to adjust your body to help support your mood, to help support this to kind of stabilize it a little bit better. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about very briefly is relationships. Okay. Could have talked about emotion. I think that's a very important conversation, maybe for a different time, but I want to talk about relationships because it's so essential. The thing that they found that mitigates the result of toxic stress in our bodies is when someone had one deep and close relationship in their life. If you have one deep, close, committed relationship in your life, it could be a spouse, it could be a best friend, it could be a colleague, and they know what's going on the inside, that will mitigate a lot of the impact of toxic stress in your life. One person, okay? Now, let me tell you about what relationship means, okay? Because most of us didn't learn how to have deep relationships. Good relationships have three things, okay? I want you to write these down. They have connection, they have candor, and they have compassion, and I'll go through those. They have connection, which means you know a little bit about this person, okay? And they know a little bit about you. You know what they like, what they don't like, you know their family, you know the ins and outs of their world, you know what they struggle with. It's the sense of you get to know them. Now, here's the hard part. They also have to get to know you. And leaders are really good at getting to know people. They're really good at pouring out. And oftentimes they struggle with letting that be the reverse, letting people in, letting people get to know them, letting people see them. So connection is a two-way street. Letting people in, letting them see you, letting them get to know you. The second thing with candor is the ability to speak with confidence with what you need to say. Okay, so it's being bold, it's being courageous, it's saying the truth, it's speaking the truth. Someone needs to hear this, I'm going to tell it to them. Now, Some of you are really good at candor. Candor is not helpful without cadence, without timing. Hear me in this. For all of you who are fantastic at candor, you speak your mind, you tell people what they need to hear. You can say the right thing at the wrong time, and it can be the wrong thing. Hear me in that. You can say the right thing at the wrong time, and it can be the wrong thing. That's why you need candor and cadence. Your candor has to be balanced by timing and asking yourself, is this the right time for this? Is this the right open? Are they open to receive this? And a good way to explore this with someone is simply ask them, hey, would it be okay if I shared some feedback with you? If they say yes, bingo, the cadence is there. The timing is accurate. They've opened up to it. If they say no, I'm not in a position to hear that, they just told you that the cadence is not right. Okay. So ask if you can give feedback. Candor plus cadence. And the last one is compassion. Essentially, what we mean here is empathy, which is you can tap into an experience of someone else and know what they might be feeling. Okay. So someone on the call expresses, a difficulty at home. Maybe someone comes into my office and they express that they're going through a divorce and it's very difficult. Now, I've been married for 10 years. I haven't been through a divorce. That doesn't mean that I'm not disconnected from what they feel. You don't have to have the same experience with someone else to have empathy for them. You just have to have some experience of pain. Now, I have a lot of relational pain, so I can imagine what it must feel like to go through a divorce, not because I've been through one, but because I know what it's like to feel betrayed and disconnected and have all that pain go on in relationship. And I use that energy to not tell them that I understand exactly what they feel, but to empathize. Man, if I was in your shoes, I'd be feeling really sad right now, really scared, really overwhelmed. Is that how you feel? Okay. Relationships have to have compassion. And here's an exercise that I want everyone to do on this call. I want you to rank yourself on a scale of 10 being really, really good at it, 0 being not good at it, on each one of those 3: connection, candor, and compassion. 10 is really good, 1 is not so good. Okay. Outside of here, I want you to rank yourself. And then I want you to ask yourself, now, what does my team need me to be? Okay. And it's going to differ based on who you're working with. Someone might need a whole lot of candor. You could even rank your team members, your executive team, on some of these. And you might say, oh, this person, they're really high on connection, which means I need to spend an extra 5 minutes just shooting the breeze with them, just asking them about family, asking them about their life. This person's really high on candor, so I do not need to shoot the breeze with them. We need to get through point A, point B, point C, and I need to tell them exactly what I need from them extremely clearly. Oh, this person needs compassion. They're really high in compassion. Okay, they need me to be a little bit more soft and sincere and empathetic to what they're going through. You need to shift and adjust a little bit. You need to know where you're at, but you also need to know where your team is at. So in review, a couple of things you can do. Change your space around your 5 senses to make it fit for your emotional state, either bringing you down or bringing you up. The second thing is change your breathing. Do diaphragmatic breathing and breathe through your nose, and that's going to help balance you out. The third thing is adjust your body. When you sit up straight, when you put your feet flat on the ground, when you take a deep breath, you're sending signals to your brain to calm and relax. And the fourth is strengthen your relationships by leaning into connection, candor, and compassion. You can't have one of those. You can't have 2 of those. You must have all 3 of those. That's a 3-legged stool. If one of those falls out, the relationship is going to be weak. Okay. Love to open it up for questions. Obviously, there's a lot more we could have gone into, but I'd love to hear feedback from you on what you most want to hear about.
Yeah, we actually have a really great question from Rick Francie out in California. And he wanted to ask you about, he finds himself more motivated for achievement out of the fear of failure versus the attraction of success. And this is, and he wants to kind of know, it served him well in his professional career, but has taken a toll on the emotional health. And how would you advise us kind of to use the attraction of success as a motivational fuel versus the fear of failure? And I think that's such a great question. We were just on a call actually with with George Kohlreiser, who's a professor in IMD Business School. And he also has this theory about how lots of leaders play not to lose versus play to win. And I think this has a lot to do with what you're talking about, how the fear and stress that drives us to an emotional space versus a logical space.
Yeah, so I just want to validate first, to adjust from pursuing success through failure to pursuing success through flourishing or through, success is a scary thing, because when I work with a lot of leaders, they're quite scared to get healthy because I'm taking away their superpower. Okay, they're workaholics. They are driven by the desire to not let people down and not fail. Now, it's causing issues in their personal relationships, but they think if I get healthy, I'm not going to succeed as much as if I'm unhealthy. And I have to have a conversation with them and say, that might actually be true. Now, that's not always the case. You have to change success to impact. Okay? You have to be a person of impact rather than a person of simply economic success. What impact are you leaving in the lives of the people you lead, in your family, in your organization, in the culture that you're a part of? What kind of person are you being? This comes down to identity. Who are you being? What kind of person do people know you to be? And if you're driven by success and you just want money, I'll probably talk to you in about 5 years when you don't have friends, and that money, you've lost all the most important things in your life, like your marriage or your kids or your friends or your health. And I hate to break it to you, money can't buy those things back. Okay, this is the most discouraging thing that leaders reach at the end of their life when they sell their company or when they go for an IPO or they have high levels of success. They feel this despair because they realize, oh, that thing that I was chasing, it happened, and I still feel the same way inside. People still don't know me and want me. So it's shifting from success to impact. And what it comes down to is really doing some deep work on your past around where you learned to be afraid of failure. Who were you afraid to disappoint? Who were you afraid to not please? You got to go back and you got to heal that, because if you don't heal what's back there, it's going to be driving what's going this way. Does that make sense? So we all have stuff back here. If we don't heal that, we don't deal with that, that will be driving this. And when you free that up, then you can make choice of where you want to go this way. You can actually choose, I don't want to be driven by failure, but it means I got to face my fear around letting people down. I got to face my fear of not being put together. So that's one way to go about it, is change success to impact. Any other questions?
Rick do you have any comments? I opened up your guys' mic so you guys can feel free to talk and have a conversation with Andy verbally if you prefer.
I have a question. I understand that in operating rooms, they play loud rock music or loud music of some sort. And I'm just wondering, Rick, what you think of that.
You want Rick to answer, or you want me to answer, Ed?
I'm sorry. No, I want you to answer. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I was ready to let Rick
No, your name.
If that's the general case in emergency operating rooms, I don't quite know what the science or logic is behind that, other than they've been working 24 hours and they probably need to stay awake. Okay, so that's probably some of the science behind that. But for some people, once again, if their energy levels are too high for physicians or for surgeons, that's going to overload their system even more. Okay. Now, they need high levels of stress to be able to perform, but if it goes too high, they're going to make a lot of mistakes. Okay, so they need to actually be more interested in noticing where am I at, and they need to balance that state personally.
Thank you.
Yeah. Doug.
Andy?
Hi.
Hey, this is Doug Packard. How you doing?
Hey, Doug.
Just thinking between you and Keriann and I, the discussions we've been having, and the part about burnout, I think maybe exactly the piece or a piece of what we need for the opening of strategies for success this year. As an example, one of my members in the last forum meeting check-in said, well, my personal win is that I haven't crawled up in a ball and packed it in.
Yeah.
She's going through a divorce, and she's a very strong woman and very intelligent. She's a lawyer and does unbelievable things for her team and everything else. But my point being, I think just so many things going on with our members right now and ourselves, intellectually and emotionally, that getting right at it as far as that opening and
Thanks,
maybe
Doug.
letting it yell, you know?
Yeah. You know, it's really, really hard to perform at work and business when your personal life is sapping so much of your energy. Okay, so when you have such incongruence between who you appear to be and what's actually going on the inside, I cannot tell you, I asked leaders, I'm like, are you tired? And they're like, I am completely exhausted. Now, I can't show anybody that I'm completely exhausted, but I am so tapped, you have no idea. Because there's such an incongruence in their life. And that incongruence takes a lot of emotional energy. Okay, it really does. So you can't show up at work with creativity, energy, spunk, charisma if your emotional system is tapped by your relationships at home and your relationship with yourself. It's just, you can't. You can pretend like you are, and you'll do well by pretending, but eventually you're just going to have a major collapse. It doesn't have to be that way. Any other
So I'm
questions?
wondering, yeah, please go ahead. Did someone say they have a question, or did I hear something? No. So I have something I'm wondering if we could maybe close around. So I think something that's really interesting to talk about, and as we dive into fears of failure and loss, I think that this year has been hard on so many leaders, and the fact of something that we don't talk about a lot, which is grief and grief arising from loss of, it can be loss of identity, loss of future, loss of meaning, loss of control. All of that has impacts in grief, and how do we deal with that? So maybe if you could close around just a few things to recognize if we're feeling some of those things, how can we emotionally prepare ourselves to take that into a positive space as we move into the next year would be really great.
Absolutely. Two ways that you can respond to grief. Grief is a natural response to loss. Let me say that again. It is a natural response to loss. If you are not feeling grief, you're not human, essentially. So natural response to loss, and it can show up as depression. It can show up as anger. It can show up as zaps your energy. You can either befriend grief as your ally, or you can fight it as your enemy. You can befriend grief as your ally, or you can fight it as your enemy. What it looks like to fight grief as your enemy. Telling grief, grabbing grief by the collar and saying, I've been sad long enough. I've been angry long enough. This grief has lasted long enough. I want it to be done. Okay. And if you fight grief, you will lose every single time. Okay. It's like being in an ocean and you push up against the waves over and over. You're not going to change it. Okay. The focus there is control, and the outcome is burnout. You want to control your grief like you want to control life, and you will reach burnout. What you have to do, like what you have to do in the ocean, is open up your hands to grief as submission, recognizing that it's your ally, recognizing that it's trying to produce character in you. It's trying to develop you, opening yourself up to it and letting those waves take you. Now, you don't know where those waves are going to take you. You're going to show up on the beach or somewhere down the road. And how grief happens is you never quite know you're out of it until you recognize that you're out of it. You reach a point where you're like, oh, I guess I'm kind of through that. I didn't even know how I got through that or when I got through that. It just feels different. That's a little bit how grief is. But the biggest thing is that you open up your hands to it and you say, okay, I feel grief. I feel anger, sadness, depression, loneliness, grief. What do you want to produce in me? What character do you want to produce in me? So the focus is submission and the outcome is character. If you try to fight it, the focus will be control and the outcome will be burnout. But if you submit to it, you will have character produced in your life. And let me just say this for someone who's gone through a lot of grief in my life. Grief is an extremely lonely experience because no one really knows your grief. They can kind of empathize with it, but grief is an extremely lonely road. And just know that it is completely natural and normal to feel anger, denial, depression, and then eventually reach a point of acceptance. Okay. Completely normal. So if you're feeling those things, it doesn't mean something's wrong. It doesn't mean you're not doing it right. It means you're actually doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, which is submitting and letting those emotions move through you to let grief do its work so that you don't have to lock it inside and shove it inside. Okay. And that will produce character in you. If you want to be a great leader, someone of influence, and you want character, grief is your best asset. It's not your enemy, it's your asset, but you have to submit to it.
Great. So I think we're actually ending 1 hour on the dot. We're going to be sharing this recording as always on Team Vibe, our resource center. I'm going to be putting out Andy's contact information. Andy has also contributed to our Executive Forum's blog, and we'll be sharing some additional resources from Andy as we move forward. So such a pleasure to have you with us today, Andy. Thank you for all of our members for participating with us. It was an amazing conversation, and we'll see you guys all again soon. And happy holidays and enjoy the end of the year.
Thanks, everybody.